So if your boat is taking on water in the middle of the ocean, grabbing a bucket and just bailing it out might keep you afloat for a few more hours.
Right, yeah.
But, I mean, eventually, if you actually want to survive, you have to patch the hole. You have to upgrade the timber. You have to actively rebuild the hull.
Exactly. And for decades, the corporate world's approach to the climate crisis has essentially been this massive, highly coordinated effort to just bail water.
Yeah.
Basically harm reduction.
Yeah.
But back in 2019 at Davos, Greta Thunberg famously told global leaders, "I want you to act as if our house is on fire."
Right. I remember that.
Yeah, and slowly but surely the business world is realizing that bailing water or, burning the house down slightly slower just isn't a survival strategy.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are exploring a dense, really transdisciplinary 2026 academic paper. It's titled Integrating Theory and Practice in Regenerative Supply Chain Management.
It is a massive read, yeah.
It is. So we are taking this massive integrative review and shortcutting your journey to being well-informed on the absolute cutting edge of business strategy.
Because the benchmark for a successful company is fundamentally shifting. It's moving away from traditional sustainability, which is really just doing less bad and moving toward regeneration.
Right.
Which is actively healing the planet.
And we're basically witnessing a total re-engineering of the global supply chain.
Yeah, we really are.
So today we're going to unpack the specific frameworks, the hidden traps, and the real-world mechanics of companies that are figuring out how to run a profitable business that actually leaves social and ecological systems healthier than they found them.
It's a huge shift.
So, okay, let's unpack this. To understand why we need to stop just bailing water and start fixing the boat, we first need to look at how supply chains have historically evolved.
Right, because the researchers in this paper trace a very specific typology.
Yeah, it starts with closed-loop supply chains, and then it evolves into green supply chains, then it moves to sustainable, then circular, and finally it arrives at regenerative.
And, each of those earlier steps definitely represented an improvement in efficiency. But scholars classify everything up to the circular economy as weak sustainability.
Weak sustainability.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the circular economy has been the absolute gold standard for corporate strategy over the last decade, but it actually has a critical structural flaw.
Okay, wait, hold on. Isn't the circular economy the holy grail of green business? Like, why is recycling suddenly not enough to save us?
Well, circularity is obsessed with the technical cycle. It's all about recycling, repairing, and keeping manufactured materials out of the landfill.
Right, which sounds good.
It is good, but it has severely underspecified the biological cycle. It hasn't really focused on actually regenerating the natural world that supplies those materials in the first place.
Ah, okay, I see.
It's basically a math problem driven by consumption. You can build the most brilliant, efficient recycling loop on the planet, but if your overall resource extraction and consumption are still skyrocketing, you're still depleting the Earth's baseline.
Oh, wow. So you're just taking more out than you're putting back in, even if you are recycling.
Exactly. In fact, the paper highlights a truly alarming statistic. Global resource circularity actually declined from 9.1% in 2018 down to 7.2% in 2023.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
That is wild. 9.1 down to 7.2%. So we are actually moving backward globally.
Yep.
And this is all while, patting ourselves on the back for using paper straws and recycling our cardboard.
Yeah, because the denominator's growing way too fast.
Yeah.
We are consuming so much absolute virgin material that our recycling efforts simply cannot keep up with the volume.
That makes total sense, sadly.
What's fascinating here is how regenerative supply chains, or RSCs, completely invert this dynamic. RSCs represent strong sustainability.
Strong sustainability. Okay,
Yeah.
so opposed to the weak sustainability from before.
Exactly. It's a massive paradigm shift from a harm reduction logic to a net positive logic. The goal isn't just surviving within planetary boundaries anymore.
It's expanding them, right?
Yes, it is extending the vitality of the local ecosystem. You have to systematically put back more than you take.
So for you listening right now, think about your own company or even just the industry you work in. Are you just trying to be less bad, which is what the researchers call eco-efficiency?
Right.
Or are you actually generating new biophysical value for the local environment? That's eco-effectiveness.
But recognizing that a shift is necessary is kind of the easy part, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, how does a massive, infinitely complex global supply chain actually pivot? It sounds impossible.
It's incredibly difficult. To map this out, the researchers built a 5-gate conceptual framework. And it's heavily tied to what they call the ABCDE factors.
Let me guess, it's an acronym.
Of course, antecedents, barriers, challenges, drivers, and effects. Getting through these 5 gates is a brutal filter for most companies.
So let's start at the beginning. Gate 1 is all about the A in that acronym, antecedents. This is basically the groundwork.
Right. Before you can regenerate a single acre of land, you need internal change agents. You need champions within the C-suite pushing the vision.
You can't just have an intern suggesting it.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
You also need place-based thinking, which means deeply understanding the specific hyper-local environment your supply chain touches.
And crucially, you need data-driven visibility over your material stocks and flows, right?
Yeah.
Because you cannot heal an ecosystem if you don't even know what materials you are extracting from it.
Exactly. And if a company actually manages to get that groundwork laid, they usually slam face first into Gate 2.
Right, which covers the B and C of the framework, barriers and challenges.
Yeah, and the researchers note this is where the vast majority of initiatives die, usually because companies fall into something called the eco-efficiency trap.
Okay, the eco-efficiency trap. Tell me more about that.
It's incredibly insidious because on a spreadsheet, it looks like real progress. It happens when companies prioritize cheap, incremental improvements over fundamental regenerative redesigns.
Oh, I see.
They optimize a harmful system to be slightly less harmful, rather than taking the risk to actually change the underlying system itself.
It's like putting a cheap Band-Aid on a broken leg just because it improves the situation by 1%. Or, trying to optimize the aerodynamics of a horse-drawn carriage so the horse doesn't have to pull as hard.
Yes, perfect analogy.
When what you really need to be doing is inventing the combustion engine. Like, you can tell your shareholders you improved efficiency by 2%, but you're still relying on an obsolete, exhaustive system.
And while you're busy making that carriage slightly more aerodynamic, the foundational infrastructure is still crumbling around you.
Wow, yeah.
And compounding that trap is the structural barrier of bureaucratic centralization. True regeneration demands local adaptation.
Right, because an agricultural ecosystem in Brazil requires an entirely different approach than, say, a manufacturing ecosystem in Indonesia.
Exactly. But slow, centralized corporate structures, where all decisions are made in a single headquarters in London or New York, they completely stifle that local agility.
Because they just want one size fits all.
Right. Centralization assumes a static universal model, but a regenerative supply chain operates as a complex adaptive system. It has to co-evolve dynamically with the specific local environment it operates within.
So if centralized global structures are the core bottleneck here, how does a massive multinational company actually make this work?
That is the big challenge.
I mean, how do they decentralize without completely falling apart and losing their entire profit margin?
Well, they have to rely on a highly specific stack of accelerators to break through that bureaucracy. And that brings us to Gate 3, driver mobilization.
Which is the D in our ABCDE framework.
Exactly. To explain how companies successfully blast through these barriers, the researchers synthesized real-world use cases using the TOE framework.
Another acronym.
Another one. It stands for Technology, Organization, and Environment.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with technology. We hear constantly about these incredible material innovations, what the paper calls recovery-enabling innovations, or REI.
Right, like totally new ways of making things.
Yeah, we're talking about things like depolymerization, which is, breaking plastics all the way back down to their molecular base so they can be rebuilt infinitely without degrading.
Which sounds like sci-fi, but it's real.
It is. Or dissolvable seams in clothing, where threads melt at a specific temperature so a garment naturally falls apart into perfect recyclable panels.
It's amazing stuff. But the paper argues these physical innovations are practically useless on their own.
Wait, why? That sounds like exactly what we need.
Because physical innovations lack predictability. If you invent a dissolvable seam to perfectly recycle a jacket, but you have no idea where that jacket is, what condition it's in, or when it will realistically return to your facility, you just can't build a reliable, profitable supply chain around it.
Ah, okay. So it's great in a lab, but useless in the real world if you can't track it.
Exactly. That is why REI must be aggressively paired with digital execution capability, or DEC. We're talking about IoT sensors, predictive analytics, and blockchain traceability.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Technology in this context isn't being used to extract more from the earth, which is how we've historically utilized tech for like the last 200 years.
Right.
It's being used to make reverse flows and waste recovery just as predictable, legible, and profitable as extracting virgin materials. And the paper highlights companies like Aquafil and Resortex that are actually doing this.
They are. They are proving that when you fuse physical material innovation with digital execution, you can finally scale recovery.
Do you have a good example of that?
Yeah, look at a company like Philips in the healthcare sector. They're using digital service models to stabilize asset life.
How does that work?
Well, instead of just selling a hospital an expensive MRI machine and walking away, they sell scans as a service. Philips actually retains ownership of the machine.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, they digitally track its performance, they maintain it, and they ensure it comes back into their manufacturing loop at the optimal time to be refurbished. The incentive completely shifts from planned obsolescence to maximum longevity.
That is brilliant. But I mean, all the dissolvable threads and digital tracking in the world don't matter if a single company is trying to force this transition in isolation.
Right, you can't do it alone.
Exactly. The technology requires a massive network to function, which brings us to the organization pillar of the TOE framework. The paper argues you desperately need orchestration infrastructure.
The coordination costs are just too massive for any one firm to shoulder alone. You need cities, banks, and governments to build the architecture so everyone can play by the same rules.
And the paper points to Bancolombia and Intesa Sanpaolo for their groundbreaking circular finance initiatives. But how exactly does a bank orchestrate regeneration?
By entirely de-risking the transition for smaller players. These banks offer sustainability-linked loans, meaning they provide lower interest rates and crucial upfront capital to companies that hit specific circular milestones.
So they're literally funding the transition.
They are financially betting that a regenerative business is less vulnerable to supply chain shocks and climate disasters, making them a lower credit risk in the long term.
That makes total sense from a financial perspective.
It does. And on the civic side, the Milan Circular Economy Lab operates as a city-level orchestrator.
Okay, what do?
They bring together diverse stakeholders, startups, massive corporations, and policymakers to institutionalize these practices across an entire regional network, rather than just leaving companies to fight it out alone.
Which flows seamlessly into the third pillar, environment. This is where we see direct biophysical ecosystem restoring practices.
Yes.
And again, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It requires that catalytic finance and supportive policy we just talked about to actually get off the ground.
Absolutely. We see the mechanics of this beautifully with a company like Greenwave. They focus on regenerative 3D ocean farming.
3D ocean farming?
Yeah, instead of monoculture fish farming, they grow vertical columns of kelp and bivalves like mussels and oysters.
Oh, wow.
And these farms require zero inputs, no fertilizer, no fresh water, and the organisms actively filter nitrogen out of the water while sequestering massive amounts of carbon.
So the act of operating the business actually leaves the ocean physically cleaner and more biodiverse than it was before the farm existed?
Exactly. And similarly, Natra, the global cosmetics giant, they work directly with local communities in the Amazon to harvest ingredients in a way that explicitly protects and expands biodiversity, rather than just, clear-cutting for quick yields.
This raises an important question, though.
Okay.
How do we actually measure success here? Because the ultimate goal isn't just financial profit anymore, it's biophysical improvements.
Right.
Like, how does a corporate accounting department put a metric on a healthier river or richer soil on their quarterly balance sheet?
That is the pivotal challenge of this entire transition. To successfully execute that environmental pillar and actually measure biophysical success, global corporations are coming to a really humbling realization.
What is?
They lack the necessary knowledge to do it. And this brings us to a massive epistemological shift.
Meaning, corporate headquarters in London or New York has to admit they actually have no idea how to heal a river basin in Brazil, and they need to relinquish control and listen to the people who do.
Exactly. For centuries, global supply chains have been built entirely on Western colonial knowledge systems.
Right.
Those systems inherently view nature merely as a resource pipeline, and they prioritize endless economic growth above all else. True regeneration requires abandoning that mindset completely.
Oh, it's a huge pivot.
It requires the deep integration of tacit ecological knowledge and indigenous epistemologies.
Now, the researchers actually anchor this concept by highlighting specific Maori principles from New Zealand, right?
Yes, they do.
Let's talk about how those translate into actual business operations.
Well, the paper highlights kaitiakitanga, which translates to guardianship and protection of the environment.
Okay.
In a business context, it means you don't act like you own the land. You treat the local river or forest as a primary stakeholder that you are just borrowing from future generations.
That completely flips the traditional shareholder model.
It really does. The paper also highlights Manakitanga, which is about deep reciprocity and mutual respect.
Meaning?
This dictates that your business model must generate a tangible surplus for the ecosystem and the community, not just extract value for distant shareholders.
And these aren't just nice philosophical concepts for a corporate brochure.
No, not at all. They are strict operational mandates.
Yeah.
You simply cannot regenerate a local landscape without the profound generational knowledge of the indigenous and local populations who have lived in balance with that specific landscape for centuries.
Right. And when you finally integrate that deep, place-based ecological knowledge with the cutting-edge digital technology we discussed earlier, you finally reach gates 4 and 5 of the framework.
Capability development and value realization.
Exactly. This covers the E in our ABCDE framework, the effects. So let's actually unpack what those effects look like for a business that makes it this far.
Well, the biophysical effects are obvious, cleaner water, richer soil.
Yeah.
But the organizational effects are profound. You develop true organizational resilience.
Because you're not just relying on one rigid system.
Exactly. A traditional supply chain snaps during a climate shock because it is rigid and extractive. A regenerative supply chain bends and adapts because it is deeply intertwined with the local ecology.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
You also develop hyper-responsiveness. If you are sharing real-time data with local farmers and operating in deep reciprocity, you can sense a localized drought or a yield drop months before a centralized competitor even notices a blip on their dashboard.
And eventually you achieve deep structural cost efficiencies because you have systematically minimized your reliance on extracting increasingly scarce, volatile, virgin materials. Hold on, though. I'm putting myself in the shoes of a CEO listening to this. I can totally see a local community-based farm or like a boutique sustainable brand embracing this entire framework,
Sure.
but a massive global conglomerate. The paper mentions concepts like degrowth. How does a multinational adopt indigenous degrowth principles without getting absolutely crushed by their competitors in a ruthless capitalist market?
Well, the researchers don't shy away from that friction at all. The paper explicitly highlights that the unequal power dynamics between massive multinational corporations and local small to medium enterprises is a massive hindrance to this entire movement.
I can imagine.
True regeneration inherently requires giving local regions real, tangible autonomy over their own resources.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, this is a fundamental shift from an anthropocentric, human-centered worldview to an ecocentric, nature-centered worldview.
It is. Concepts like degrowth, which means deliberately scaling back harmful, unnecessary production, and A-growth, which means ignoring GDP as the ultimate metric of human success. They are foundational to an ecocentric worldview.
Which is pretty radical for a Fortune 500 company.
Oh, absolutely. If a global conglomerate wants to be truly regenerative, they have to accept that they can no longer dictate terms from a centralized headquarters. They have to become co-creators with local stakeholders. They have to actually yield control.
So it's not just about slapping a green regenerative label on the same old extraction machine. It requires actual power sharing.
Yes. The benchmark for business success is fundamentally being rewritten from extraction to healing, from just slowing down the damage to actively co-evolving with the natural world.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this deep dive? It means the next time you hear a company boasting in a press release about being sustainable or eco-efficient, you now have the exact mental models to look a little closer.
Yeah.
You have the 5-gate framework. You understand the ABCDE factors, antecedents, barriers, challenges, drivers, and effects.
Right.
You can look at their operations and ask yourself, is this company actually trapped in the eco-efficiency trap? Just making their horse-drawn carriage slightly more aerodynamic?
Or are they genuinely utilizing the TOE framework technology, organization, and environment, partnering with local ecological knowledge to actively heal the planet?
You now know what strong sustainability actually looks like in practice. It's rigorous, it's highly localized, and it requires a complete operational transformation.
Which brings us right back to our sinking boat.
Yeah, if traditional sustainability was just a panicked effort to bail water, and regeneration is the hard work of actively fixing the boat, it leaves us with one final lingering question to mull over.
And what's that?
If true regeneration requires giving local communities and ecosystems ultimate autonomy over their resources, what happens when a local community's ecological needs directly conflict with a global supply chain's demand for quarterly growth?
That is the ultimate test.
Right. Is the ultimate test of a truly regenerative business its willingness to take a massive financial loss or even step off the boat entirely when the local ecosystem simply says no?